What if I told you there's a clock that knows exactly when you're going to die? Not approximately, not within a range, but to the exact second. And the most terrifying part, it has never, ever been wrong. On a rain-soaked evening in October, archaeologist Emma Hartley pushed open the creaking door of an antique shop she'd passed 100 times but never once entered. The neon sign above flickered weakly, spelling out curiosities and relics. Inside, long shadows danced between towers of forgotten furniture and artifacts that seemed to watch her every move. Emma wasn't looking for anything in particular. She was just killing time, escaping the downpour. But then, she saw it, sitting on a dusty shelf, almost hidden between old leather-bound books and cracked ceramic figures, was a brass clock unlike anything she'd ever seen. Its surface was covered in strange, unsettling symbols, intricate engravings of hourglasses and skulls, with Roman numerals that seemed to shimmer and shift in the dim light. Emma felt an invisible pull, a force drawing her closer. As she reached out, a voice cut through the silence from the shadows. "That clock. It's not for sale." An old man emerged, his weathered face grave with a warning she couldn't yet understand. This was Mr. Thorne, the shop's owner, and the fear in his eyes was chillingly real. "It belonged to a watchmaker who went mad," Thorne explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "He claimed it showed him things, terrible things." Emma laughed it off. She was a scientist, a woman of logic and reason. Magic and curses were just stories. But as her fingers brushed against the cold brass surface, something impossible happened. The clock chimed once, a single, sharp note, even though no one had wound it. And then, as both of them watched in horror, a name began to appear, engraved on its face, as if by an unseen hand, Margaret Hayes. Below it, a date materialized like ink bleeding through paper. Tonight, 11:47 p.m. Emma's blood ran cold. Margaret Hayes was her neighbor, the sweet elderly woman in apartment 4B who always had fresh-baked cookies and stories about her grandchildren. "What kind of sick trick is this?" Emma demanded, snatching her hand back as if burned. Thorne's expression was deadly serious. "It's no trick. That clock has predicted 17 deaths. Every single one. Accurate to the minute." He told her the story of Cornelius Walsh, the brilliant watchmaker who created the clock in the 1880s. Walsh was a genius who became obsessed with a field he called temporal mechanics and mortality prediction. He filled journals with complex astronomical charts and frantic calculations, believing he had uncovered the mathematical pattern of life and death itself. One of his final entries read, "I found it. The precise, quantifiable moment when life becomes death." Cornelius Walsh died in an asylum, driven mad by the terrible knowledge his creation had shown him. But Emma was a rational person. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be real. It was a hoax, a cruel prank. She quickly took a photo of the clock with her phone and rushed out into the rain, her mind racing. Her own watch showed 9:15 p.m. She had just over 2.5 hours to prove this was all just elaborate nonsense. Margaret answered her door with a warm smile, a tea kettle whistling cheerfully in the background. She looked perfectly healthy, vibrant even, already dressed in her nightgown. She was excitedly telling Emma about her plans to visit her grandson the very next morning. How do you tell someone they have less than 3 hours to live based on a prediction from a supposedly supernatural clock? Emma tried everything she could think of. She fabricated a story about a gas leak in the building, desperately suggesting Margaret should stay the night in her apartment. Margaret, ever so polite, simply declined, assuring her everything was fine. Panicked, Emma even called 911, attempting to report a premonition. But the operator on the other end treated her like she was delusional and warned her against making false reports. She video-called her colleague, David, a fellow historian. He was fascinated by the clock's intricate craftsmanship from the photo she sent, but dismissed the prediction as mere superstition. "Emma, it's a beautiful piece, but that's all it is," he said. Then he asked a question that would haunt her. "Even if it's real, can you change fate? More importantly, should you?" That question echoed in her mind as the minutes ticked relentlessly away. At 10:30 p.m., consumed by a desperation she'd never known, Emma did something she never thought she'd be capable of. She picked the lock to Margaret's apartment with a hairpin from her purse, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold it steady. She slipped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. Margaret had fallen asleep in her armchair, a book resting gently on her lap, the television playing quietly in the corner. Emma sat down on the floor nearby, appointing herself as an unwanted, silent guardian. The clock on Margaret's mantelpiece ticked steadily, each second a hammer blow counting down to destiny. 10:55 p.m. Margaret stirred and her eyes opened, finding Emma sitting in the dim light of her living room. The shock on her face quickly turned to concern. It was then that Emma finally broke down, the words tumbling out in a frantic, tearful confession. She told her everything: the antique shop, the clock, the name engraved on its face, the exact, predicted time of death, 11:47 p.m. Margaret listened patiently, her expression calm. When Emma was finished, she did something completely unexpected. She smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile. "My dear," the old woman said softly, taking Emma's trembling hand in her own. "If it's my time, then it's my time. We all die, child. The when doesn't matter nearly as much as the how we lived." Emma wanted to scream, to shake her, to force her to understand the urgency. "But I can't just sit here and let you die." As 11:30 p.m. struck, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Margaret began talking, not of fear or death, but of her late husband, of her children, of the full and beautiful life she'd been blessed to live. And as she spoke, Emma noticed it. Margaret's breathing was becoming slightly labored. Checking her pulse, she found it was faint and irregular. "I'm calling an ambulance," Emma declared, reaching for her phone. But Margaret gently stopped her hand. "And then what?" "I've had 82 beautiful years, my dear. It's all right." The final minutes crawled by like agonizing hours. 11:42 p.m. 5 minutes left. Margaret closed her eyes peacefully, her grip on Emma's hand still warm and firm. 11:45 p.m. Margaret's breathing grew shallow, but it was steady. 11:46 p.m. Emma held her own breath, praying for a miracle, for the clock to be wrong just this once. The clock on the wall struck 11:47 p.m. Margaret took one last, deep, rattling breath. Her face, so peaceful just a moment before, broke into a small, serene smile, and then, stillness. With shaking fingers, Emma checked for a pulse. Nothing. She checked again. Nothing. Margaret Hayes had died at exactly 11:47 p.m., just as the cursed clock had predicted. Emma sat there in the suffocating silence, tears streaming down her face as the horrifying reality of it all crashed down upon her. When she finally brought herself to look at her phone, at the photo she had taken of the clock's face, Margaret's name and the date had vanished completely, as if they had never been there at all. At dawn, emotionally and spiritually shattered, Emma found herself drawn back to the antique shop. Peering through the rain-streaked window, she could see the clock, and on its polished brass face a new name was already glowing faintly in the early morning light. Robert Sullivan, 3 days. The clock wasn't finished. It would never be finished. And Emma realized with a growing, sickening horror that she was now bound to it, cursed with a knowledge no human being should ever possess. The question that kept echoing in her mind, louder and louder, was the one David had asked her: "Can you change fate, or are we all just watching a countdown to the inevitable?" Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. 3 days. That's all the warning Robert Sullivan had. Emma couldn't let it go. She buried herself in research, her university office becoming a war room covered in papers, empty coffee cups, and the haunted look of someone who'd seen death keep a perfect appointment. Her whiteboard was filled with one name: Cornelius Walsh. Watchmaker. Born 1847, died 1891 in an asylum. The newspaper archives painted a disturbing picture. Walsh had been renowned throughout Europe for his exceptional timepieces, but something changed in 1885 when he traveled to Prague. He returned ... different, obsessed. His journals, Emma discovered, were filled with astronomical charts and calculations that looked more like the ravings of a madman than the work of a craftsman. Temporal mechanics and mortality prediction, his notes claimed. Walsh believed he'd found it the mathematical pattern underlying death itself. Through genealogy records, Emma tracked down Walsh's great-great-granddaughter, Amelia. The family legend, Amelia revealed over video chat, was that Cornelius believed time and death weren't random at all. They were mechanical, predictable. He'd studied under a mysterious astronomer in Prague who claimed to possess ancient knowledge, forbidden calculations that revealed the fabric of fate itself. But here's what made Emma's blood run cold. Walsh had created 3 identical clocks. The one in Thorne's shop was number 2. One had been destroyed decades ago, and the third, its location was unknown. In 1885, in a candlelit observatory in Prague, that mysterious astronomer had shown Walsh ancient texts covered in celestial calculations. "Death is not random," he'd whispered. "It's written in the stars, in the rhythm of the cosmos itself." Walsh became consumed by this knowledge. He built his clocks using something no watchmaker had ever considered, a fragment of meteorite, incorporated directly into the mechanism. This exotic material, Emma would later learn, contained properties that theoretical physics was only beginning to understand. Walsh tested his creation on his own apprentice. The clock showed the young man's death 3 hours away. Walsh desperately tried to warn him. The apprentice laughed it off as his master's growing madness. 3 hours later, he died in a street accident, exactly as the clock had predicted, down to the minute. That's when Walsh truly lost his mind. Everywhere he looked, the clock showed him death after death after death, and he couldn't save anyone. But Emma didn't have time for history lessons. Robert Sullivan was a local businessman, and according to the clock, he had less than 24 hours left. She tracked him to his office building, a glass tower downtown. When she burst into his office claiming to know the exact minute of his death, Sullivan thought she was insane and called security. "I know how this sounds," Emma pleaded as security guards approached, "but you're in danger." Tomorrow at 6:15 p.m., they escorted her out, but Emma left her card pressed into Sullivan's hand. "Please, just call me." The next day, Emma staked out Sullivan's building from a coffee shop across the street, watching him through the windows. Meetings, lunch, the gym. A normal day for a man who had no idea it was his last. At 5 p.m., Emma saw Sullivan heading to the parking garage. She had to do something. Racing across the street, she blocked his car with her own body. Sullivan, now truly angry, rolled down his window. "You have 2 minutes," he snapped. Emma explained everything in a frantic rush. The clock, Margaret, the perfect accuracy. Something in her desperation must have reached him because Sullivan's face changed. He remembered his own grandmother who'd had premonitions. He remembered dismissing them as superstition, until they came true. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. The dashboard clock showed 5:45 p.m. "Go somewhere safe, somewhere different from your routine." They drove to Emma's apartment. Sullivan paced like a caged animal while Emma tried to keep him calm. At 6 p.m., his phone rang. His assistant's panicked voice carried across the room. "Mr. Sullivan, there's been an explosion at your office. Gas leak. The entire floor is gone. If you'd been there, ... double quotes." Sullivan dropped the phone, staring at Emma with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. "You saved my life," he whispered. But when Emma checked the photo on her phone, her stomach dropped. Sullivan's name still glowed on the clock's face. The time hadn't changed. 6:15 p.m. And then, at exactly 6:15 p.m., Sullivan clutched his chest. His face went white. He collapsed before Emma could catch him. "No, no, no." Emma called 911, performing CPR, screaming for him to stay with her. The paramedics arrived within minutes. They worked on him in the ambulance, in the emergency room, shocking his heart again and again. Time of death, 6:15 p.m. Emma sat in the hospital waiting room, destroyed by the realization she hadn't changed fate. She'd only changed where Sullivan would be when fate caught up to him. The clock didn't care about explosions or heart attacks. Death found its mark. That night, Emma returned to the antique shop with one purpose: destroy the clock. Thorne was waiting for her, as if he'd known she'd come. "Destroying it won't stop death," he said quietly. "It only stops you from knowing." "Then what's the point?" Emma cried, tears streaming down her face. "Why show us if we can't change anything?" That's when Thorne revealed his secret. "My name was on it once. 40 years ago." Emma froze. Thorne let that sink in before continuing. He'd seen his own death predicted, spent decades trying to outrun it, changed everything about his life, his career, his relationships, his very identity. "But I'm still here," Thorne said simply. The date came and went. Nothing happened, but Margaret died. Sullivan died. "How did you survive?" "I don't know," Thorne admitted. "Maybe my fear changed me enough. Maybe fate has exceptions. Or maybe ... double quotes." The clock chimed, cutting him off. A new name appeared on its brass face, glowing in the shop's dim light. Emma Hartley, 7 days. Emma felt the color drain from her face as she stared at her own name. Below it, a time materialized. 3:33 a.m. 1 week from now, in the darkest hours before dawn, Emma would die. "Now you understand," Thorne said softly, "why I tried to warn you away." But Emma wasn't ready to accept death. Not yet. She had 7 days to understand how this impossible clock worked. 7 days to find the loophole that had saved Thorne. 7 days to uncover the secret that Cornelius Walsh had died trying to comprehend. She photographed every inch of the clock, documenting the mysterious symbols etched into its surface. The engravings, she realized, matched constellation patterns. Ancient astronomy merged with clockwork precision. When David saw her apartment the next day, walls covered in research and photographs. He knew something had changed. Emma looked like she hadn't slept in days. Because she hadn't. "Emma, what's happening to you?" She showed him everything. Margaret's death, Sullivan's death, and finally, the photograph of the clock bearing her own name. David's skepticism evaporated. He dove into the research alongside her, two brilliant minds working against an impossible deadline. That's when they discovered that Walsh's original workshop still existed in an abandoned building in the industrial district. That night they broke in. The workshop was a time capsule, covered in decades of dust but perfectly preserved. Walsh's tools, his workbench, mechanical parts, scattered like the pieces of a broken god. And then Emma found it. Walsh's journal, hidden behind a loose brick, as if he'd known someone would come looking. The entries revealed Walsh's final breakthrough, written in increasingly erratic handwriting. The clock doesn't predict, it observes. There are threads connecting all moments, Walsh had written, past, present, future, all existing simultaneously. The clock sees along these threads. It shows not what will happen, but what is happening, viewed from a different point in time. And in his final entry, dated the day of his death, "I've seen my own death. I will not run from it. I will understand it. The clock shows me dying tonight in the asylum. I go willingly, seeking truth in the moment of my end." Emma looked up from the journal, her hand shaking. Walsh had walked into his own death with open eyes, searching for answers in the darkness. Now she had less than 5 days to find those answers herself. With only 5 days left, Emma's apartment had become a monument to obsession. She hadn't slept in 48 hours. Coffee cups formed towers on every surface, a testament to her frantic race against time. Her friend David would bring food she didn't eat, pleading with her to get some rest. "You can't think clearly like this," he'd say, but Emma couldn't afford clarity. She needed answers. She spread astronomical charts across the floor, desperately trying to match them to the intricate symbols on the death clock. And then, she saw it. The pattern, the same one Walsh had discovered all those years ago. These weren't just random decorations. They were quantum probability nodes, points in space-time where multiple outcomes collapsed into a single, definitive event. Her voice hoarse with exhaustion, she pointed at the charts. "Look," she said to David, "death isn't fixed, it's just highly probable." David studied her work, his confusion slowly turning into understanding. "You're saying the clock identifies points where probability becomes certainty?" Emma nodded. "Exactly. Walsh found the mathematical moments where quantum uncertainty resolves into one inevitable outcome. The moment the wave function collapses. The moment possibility becomes reality. But knowing the science wasn't enough. Could it be changed? For the next 2 days, Emma ran experiments, testing if her choices could alter the clock's predictions. And incredibly, they did. Small things shifted. Probabilities rippled. On day 6, with her own time running out, she contacted Amelia Walsh again, desperate for any information about Cornelius's final days. Amelia sent photographs of letters Walsh had written from the asylum. Emma's hands shook as she read them. "I see now," Walsh had written, "the clock doesn't seal our fate, our fear does." Another letter, dated just 2 days before his death, sent a chill down her spine. "I've studied all 17 predictions that came true. Those who ran from their deaths died trying to escape. Those who accepted it and lived fully in their remaining time. Sometimes the clock released them." Emma's mind raced. She thought of Margaret, who accepted her death with peace and died exactly as predicted, but spent her final hours grateful for her life. She thought of Sullivan, who panicked, fled, and fought his fate with terror, only for the clock to find him anyway. And then there was Thorne. Thorne had transformed himself so completely that he became a different person. The prediction no longer fit who he was. "The clock predicts the death of who we are when it marks us," Emma whispered. "If we fundamentally change, if we become someone new, that prediction is for someone who no longer exists." On her final day, Emma made a choice that surprised even herself. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She went to Margaret's grave, placed fresh flowers on the cold marble, and sat in the grass. "You tried to tell me," she said softly. "It's not about running. It's about accepting, about living fully in whatever time we have." She spent that day differently than any day before. She painted, something she hadn't done since college. She called her estranged mother and finally said the things she'd been too proud to say. She watched the sunset from her rooftop, really watched it, seeing colors she'd been too busy to notice for years. She wrote letters to people she loved, not as goodbyes, but as love letters to her life and the connections she'd made. She danced in her kitchen. She laughed with David, sharing old jokes and dreams they never pursued because they always thought there would be more time. As evening fell, David refused to leave her side. "I'm not leaving you alone tonight." Emma smiled, and for the first time, she meant it. "I'm not afraid anymore," she replied. "If it happens, I've lived today fully, more fully than I've lived in years." They played cards, talked about everything and nothing. At midnight, Emma felt strangely at peace, more alive than she'd felt since touching that cursed clock. 1 a.m. passed. 2 a.m. they sat by the window, drinking tea, watching the city lights twinkle. At 3 a.m., David checked his watch nervously, but Emma just squeezed his hand. "Whatever happens," she said, "thank you for being here." 3:30 a.m. arrived. Emma made more tea, her hands steady, no fear, no regret, just gratitude for this strange, beautiful existence. Then came the dreaded moment. 3:33 a.m. Emma closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and waited for the end. Seconds crawled by. Nothing happened. At 3:34 a.m. she opened her eyes. David was staring at her, tears streaming down his face. She was alive, still breathing. He embraced her, and they both sobbed with relief and confusion and overwhelming joy. The next morning, Emma returned to the antique shop one last time. Thorne was waiting, a knowing smile on his face. "You found it," he said simply. Emma nodded. "The clock shows the death of who we are when it marks us. I spent that last day becoming someone new, someone who wasn't afraid, someone who had truly lived." Thorne's smile widened. "And that person," he said, "didn't match the prediction anymore." Emma looked at the clock. Where her name had been, the brass was now blank and polished. But as she watched, a new name began to materialize. David Chen, 1 year. The weight of knowledge settled on her shoulders once more. David, her friend who had stood by her, now had his own countdown. "What will you do?" Thorne asked. Emma thought of Margaret's piece, Sullivan's fear, her own transformation. "I'll tell him," she said, "but not as a curse. As a gift, a reminder that time is precious, that we should live each day as our truest selves." She found David at the park where they'd first met. As she told him everything, his fear was palpable. But as she shared Walsh's wisdom and her own journey, something in his eyes changed. "So I have a year," he said slowly, "to become the person I've always wanted to be." "We all do," Emma replied gently. "The clock just made it visible for you." Over the next year, Emma watched David transform. He quit the job he hated to start the non-profit he'd always dreamed of. He reconnected with family. He learned to paint, to dance, to say "I love you" without hesitation. He became more present, more authentic, more vibrantly alive than ever before. 1 year later they returned to the shop together. Thorne greeted them, and they looked at the clock. David's name was gone. "Another one who learned the secret," Thorne said quietly. He then reached into his pocket and produced an old brass key. "I've been the guardian for 40 years, he said, pressing it into Emma's palm. "But I'm tired, and you understand its purpose now." Emma held the key, feeling its weight, the responsibility, the truth, the possibility. "Every person who touches that clock," Thorne said, "is given a choice to live in fear or to live fully, to remain who they are or to become who they could be. That's not a curse, Emma, that's a gift." In the weeks that followed, Emma took over the shop. She learned to recognize the people drawn to the clock, just as she once had been. One evening, a young woman entered, her eyes immediately finding the clock. Emma stepped from the shadows. "That clock," she said gently, "is very special. Come, let me tell you about it." On the clock's face, a name glowed softly. Sarah Mitchell, 2 weeks. As Emma guided her through the truth, she finally understood. The clock didn't predict death. It predicted transformation. The physical death was just one possibility. The real prediction was the death of the self, the ego, the fearful person. Those who shed their old selves, who transformed completely, sometimes walked away from their predicted deaths entirely. The clock chimed, and new names began to form. The cycle continued. But now, Emma understood Walsh's final revelation. We are all dying from the moment we're born. The clock just makes us aware, makes us choose, makes us live. And that awareness, that choice, is the real gift. It's a reminder that time is finite, life is precious, and transformation is always possible, especially in the face of death. If this story made you question your own mortality and how you're living your life, hit that like button. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because we dive deep into the stories that make you question reality itself. Drop a comment below. If you found a clock that showed your death date, would you look or would you walk away? I'll see you in the next story, if fate allows it.